Now, I noted in my article a new item that I discovered that somebody mentioned on one of the websites I occasionally look at. If you have upgraded to Catalina and then do a time machine backup, it modifies your time machine backup drive so it will no longer be readable by Mojave or earlier. So if you upgrade to Catalina, then change your mind and downgrade to Mojave, you can't restore your backup. You can restore the backup while you're running Catalina, so you can downgrade, but after that you can't use the same drive to do backups because it won't recognise it. You have to wipe it and start again. So basically, don't rely on a time machine backup as a way of temporarily upgrading to Catalina. If you go to upgrade to Catalina, make sure you don't have your time machine drive connected until you're certain you're staying there. That's my recommendation. I haven't actually got a clear description yet of what they've changed, just that the way in which it organises the data on the time machine backup drive has changed in some way. So effectively it's a one-way trip for that particular time machine backup drive once you've gone on to Catalina. So the other thing which surprised me, which didn't really, I was expecting it to happen eventually, is if you use a hard drive connected via FireWire, then Catalina no longer supports booting from a hard drive through a FireWire bus. So I still have quite a large number of hard drives that have FireWire, but I anticipated this many years ago and I made sure that I bought nearly all of them dual interface FireWire and USB. So I can plug them in via USB if I need to if FireWire stopped working or I didn't have it available on a computer. Unfortunately, some of them are USB 2, which is half the speed of FireWire 800, so those particular drives I'm probably not going to be using much, and certainly not for anything I care about. You can still access the drives via FireWire, you just can't boot from them. So that only matters if you're trying to do something like a clone and you want to then boot from your clone into an emergency or something like that. Now, having said that, the last Mac Apple sold which had built-in FireWire was the 2012 MacBook Pro, which they stopped selling in 2016. So Apple has not sold any Macs with FireWire ports on it for 3 years now. However, they do still sell the FireWire to Thunderbolt adapter, which I have 3 of because I don't know whether they're going to stop selling them.
So does this include not being able to use those
one of those things
for rebooting?
Well, the issue is it will not recognise a FireWire device as a boot device. So it doesn't matter how you're connecting it.
It doesn't matter how you connect.
No, it just won't boot from it. If it's got Catalina on it, it can't boot. Is the issue.
It's only useful for plugging it in just as a backup thing to
Yeah, no problem using it for backups. Like I've got currently 2 hard drives connected at home via FireWire. I'll be happily continuing to use those with Catalina as time machine backups. That'll be fine. If I need to reboot my computer from them, I can just plug them in via USB because both of those do USB 3, so that'll be all right. So I'm not too worried about it. But it's just, if anybody does have an investment and an ongoing investment in FireWire drives like I do, then it's worth knowing about that. So beyond that, basically, the current state is that I'm waiting for 10.15.2, and my plan is to repeat my clone and upgrade test to see if they've fixed any issues like the losing all your iTunes album artwork, which I had when I upgraded on 10.15.0. Now, one thing I have seen mentioned in the last couple of days, one of the issues in Catalina with the music app is they got rid of the column browser, which provides a nice way of subdividing your library by artist or album or genre. Apparently that's coming back in 10.15.2, so Apple's retracted that feature deletion because enough people complained about it. So that I didn't use that feature very often, but occasionally I did, and it was quite handy. So careful, just got my chair on top of the power cord. That's not good. Hopefully I didn't pierce the interior.
I think you'd know by now.
Yeah, I think I'd know by now. Everything would have turned off, at least the projector wouldn't. But
would be pulling off the ceiling.
yeah. Well, not me, but I was worried about everything plugged into it. Right.
One from the Thunderbolt.
Yep.
I tried to find a Thunderbolt hub and found out you can't get Thunderbolt hubs.
No, you can't get a Thunderbolt hub because the Thunderbolt is not a bus, not a distributable bus. It's a point-to-point thing. You can only get devices that go have a single Thunderbolt in and a single Thunderbolt out. That's the best you can do. You can't have a device which has a single Thunderbolt in and 5 Thunderbolts out, because
I found a Belkin device last night, which I've never bought, which has 1 in and 2 out.
no, it doesn't. It may have 1 in, 1 out, and a mini display port. It does not have. There is no possibility of having a device with more than 2 Thunderbolt ports on it, because Intel does not make a controller chip with more than 2 Thunderbolt ports in it. So, sorry? No, because the most of the point of Thunderbolt is that it's got very high bandwidth, and as soon as you add more ports, you're going to have to subdivide that bandwidth between all the ports, and also you have restrictions on how you can plug displays into the extra ports, which require the display controller built into the, or the display redirection built into the chip to handle it correctly. So it's too complicated, I think.
So how come you have 2 display ports, just 2 Thunderbolt?
Because they've got 2 separate Thunderbolt buses in the computer. And on the newer models with Thunderbolt 3, they've got 4 separate Thunderbolt buses on the computer. So those are actually 4 origin points for 4 totally independent Thunderbolt buses. Whereas, sorry?
One only has 2, it's a pain.
Yeah.
It's only 3.
Yeah, but there's various devices. I don't actually have anything Thunderbolt 3 with me at the moment, because I haven't gone on board with them yet, but yeah, you can get things like that, which is a Thunderbolt 3 to Thunderbolt 2 adapter. So that is a one-to-one connection for plugging older Thunderbolt things into newer Thunderbolt things, basically, or vice versa. And you can get devices like this one, which is a third-party, not actually Thunderbolt, it's USB-C. So that's USB-C multi-port docks. So that has SD card, micro SD card, Ethernet in this one. Another USB-C port for daisy chaining something else or providing power, multiple USB-A ports and HDMI. So there's variations on this theme from multiple manufacturers. And some of those actually support Thunderbolt, but they take away one of your Thunderbolt ports in the process, so they actually consume one to do it. So, yeah. But basically, a Thunderbolt in FireWire was very similar. It was actually possible with FireWire to have a FireWire hub with multiple devices hanging off it, but they were so rare, I've never seen one. I've never been aware of where you can buy one. You can daisy chain them. You can daisy chain Thunderbolt to a limit of 7 devices. That's what the hubs are for. So you have one Thunderbolt coming in, one Thunderbolt going out, next device in the chain, next device in the chain, but you can only go 7 away from the computer. Whereas FireWire you can do 63 or something easily. But anyway, yep. All right. Okay. So, any questions on the Catalina or iOS 13 stuff? Does anybody have any sort of scenarios they're considering? Now, Margaret, you were asking about why did I use another computer to do my cloning thing?
Yes, I mean, you've got all these various devices,
Yeah.
so you have the option to use a Mac Mini.
Yeah.
But for me, I really just have my current computer, and so I'm just wondering whether there'd be any dangers in
Right. Okay.
making in my first download of Catalina, using it to make a bootable backup onto a hard drive, and would SuperDuper work okay for that?
Okay. All right. So first, to explain why I did this on another computer, that was mainly for convenience, so it would allow me to run my normal system and a clone of it at the same time, so I could actually see them both running simultaneously and see what was different. So that was the reason.
But I just wasn't sure whether there'd be any inherent caution.
Right. Okay. So if we imagined, for argument's sake, that I'd done this all with one computer, then the way I would have done that is to clone my computer onto an external drive using, I think I use Carbon Copy Cloner, because I now find that is a bit more functional than SuperDuper for some things. But SuperDuper is okay for cloning Mojave systems. It's not yet, they haven't yet released a final version which is compatible with Catalina. Yes, so Carbon Copy Cloner is ahead of SuperDuper at the moment, but SuperDuper is up to about the 5th beta release of an update which is compatible with Catalina. Yeah, and they're now getting down to fixing minor bugs rather than major ones, so it should be okay. But what I would have done is cloned it in exactly the same way as I did, but rather than moving the hard drive to a different computer, I'd have left it on this computer, boot it from that drive and upgrade a Catalina on it, and then run it. So then I'd be running the computer from an external hard drive, using it to test everything. The main issue I'm aware of with doing it that way is that Mojave and Catalina fight with each other for control over the Spotlight search index. So if you have any arrangement where you've got a Mojave system and a clone of that system on Catalina, Catalina will wipe your Mojave system's Spotlight index and build its own one, and will then give you things like search results, which are a mixture of the two hard drives. So this gets very confusing.
Can you dodge that by just saying, okay, I'm not going to use Spotlight?
Well, for example, you can't do searches in Finder, you can't do searches in Mail. It's all tied into the Spotlight
I'm just
index.
saying, if you're just going to use it to screen, like if you've got a checklist of things that you want to check whether Mojave's messed up on your computer, like what we're discussing with Mail or anything else of that matter, if you just doggedly work through that while just not doing anything with Spotlight.
Yeah, well, you can do that, but if you try and do any searches, then it's going to get confused, basically, because it'll give you mixed results. There is actually a technical workaround for that particular problem, where you create a specially named file in the right place on both drives, which tells Spotlight not to index this drive unless you're booted from it. There's a trick which Apple's actually published a rather obscure support article for it, so I've actually done that on one of my drives, so it doesn't have that interfere with each other. But it's sort of like a very long and complicated file name that goes in a hidden file in the right place, so it needs terminal commands to set it up, and I don't remember the details off the top of my head.
Theoretically, it could, if you kept it fairly brief and to the point, presumably you could do it if you just leave Spotlight alone while you were checking.
Yep. The only other issue is that upgrading to Catalina, you can only boot Catalina on a Mac on which you have installed Catalina, because it does a firmware update in the process of installing the operating system. So, for example, I have upgraded that clone drive to Catalina, which has upgraded this computer's firmware to support Catalina. This computer has not had an installation of Catalina done on it, so I cannot currently take this drive and boot it on this computer, because I haven't done an install of Catalina, and the firmware on here is not compatible with Catalina.
That sounds as if it's not possible after all.
No, it is. So the point is that if you do this all on one computer, then your one computer will be upgraded already internally to support Catalina. So that's a one-way operation to upgrade its internal firmware.
And it would happen in the process
Of installing Catalina on the clone. That would happen as a side effect of that.
Okay, but it wouldn't change the fact that I was on, say, Mojave.
No, but it means that after that point,
Already.
when you reboot from Mojave, your computer is then running a updated firmware which supports Catalina, but is running an older operating system. That's supposed to keep working fine, and I don't think I've ever run into a problem with it, but it's worth just being aware of it. And that's the problem I was concerned about last month with people having had dead computers. That was the firmware upgrade process which actually killed the computer. So anything going wrong during that firmware upgrade process might result in a dead Mac. So it doesn't matter which drive you're doing it on, your computer may die if it suffers from anything relating to that particular fault. But as I noted in my article, there have been no further public reports of that issue, and no further news articles about it in the last month. So I think it's about a dozen or so people out of millions, probably, that have complained about this. And one website happened to publish an article about it the day before I needed to do Capital Apple, so I saw this and was too worried about it not to alert people to it until we knew more. So my feeling at the moment is it's probably something that was already wrong with their computers, and installing any operating system would have triggered the same problem, not just Catalina, because it was something like they had a faulty drive, and the process of doing the firmware update requires doing some special files set up on the drive, which then the firmware needs to read, and if that fails, you may end up with a dead firmware in your Mac.
In which case, if you just gone ahead and downloaded Catalina straight onto your laptop, the same thing could have happened.
Could have happened, and it could have happened by reinstalling Mojave. It could have happened by installing a minor update to the same operating system you're already running. Every single one of those does a firmware
So in
update.
a sense, you're no worse off.
No. No, so I think that's no longer a concern of mine because I have not seen. It's not like there's been major panic about it, and in fact, not even mentioned. I have not seen a single mention of it in any of the websites that I regularly read. So yeah, but if you're at all concerned, just keep that in mind as it will upgrade your firmware in the process. Okay. All right. I think that was all, unless anybody has any other Catalina-related questions. So I'll switch to talking about new MacBook Pro now. Take us down a notch in terms of worrying factors. So in fact, I can just refer to my article if I happen to have one. That's handy just to remind me of the details. So yeah, having trouble typing now. My keyboard's getting hot. That's the one, right, MacBook Pro 16. So basically Apple had announced and released this new version of the MacBook Pro, which is a replacement of the 15-inch MacBook Pro. So they've stopped selling the 15-inch MacBook Pro and are now selling the 16-inch MacBook Pro instead. The price in theory has not changed, but New Zealand's price went up $300 because property exchange rate. So basically the cheapest you can get one of these has gone up by $300. I mean, the standard prices of the models are both $300 higher. The counterbalance of that is that they also doubled the storage. So the storage upgrade price on the previous model was $340. So if you wanted to get the 256 gig entry level model but replace it with a 512 gig SSD, it cost you $340 more. That same configuration is now standard, so you save $40 as long as you wanted more storage. So effectively, the only thing you're missing out on is the standard price option base off-the-shelf configurations. If you don't want the extra storage, it's going to cost you more, effectively. But if you do want the extra storage, it's actually better off still. So that's good. So the major thing to be aware of is that if you have seen a 15-inch 2016, 17, 18, 19 model, which is the new style one with the butterfly keyboard and touch bar and so forth, these ones are slightly bigger and larger and heavier. If, however, you're familiar with the 2015 or earlier MacBook Pros, it's slightly smaller and thinner and lighter, very slightly. So I have a 2013, which is the same, basically exactly the same as 2012, 14, 15. The new 2016 one is going to be a slight physical improvement over this one in terms of all dimensions. So that's a good upgrade for people in that group. It's not necessarily quite such a good upgrade for people in the 2016 and upwards because you're going to get a physically heavier computer and that sort of thing. But then of course you get the advantages. The screen gets bigger, so what they've done is they've just made the bezels on the side in particular narrower. So you can see from the picture here that little bit there that's what we're talking about. So that's narrower. So they've managed to squeeze 0.6 of an inch diagonally more screen in there, so they can officially say it's 16 inches rather than 15 inches because the 15 was actually 15.4, not 15.0. So it's only a little bit bigger. If you compare the resolutions, do I actually have? Yes, I did. I've got this one. I created this table, which I've been regularly updating. So we've got the 16-inch, if I compare these last two lines here, so that's the 15 and that's the 16, so at the bottom. So which column's which? That's height. So you can see it's gone up by 0.7 of a centimetre. Is that 0.07 of a centimetre? Yes, it is. So it's 0.07 of a centimetre. So it's 7 millimetres thick. No, I can't be right. 0.7 of a millimetre thicker, thank you. Just remembering I'm off by one, so there's centimetres here. So it's gone up by nearly a centimetre in width, half a centimetre in depth, and 170 grams heavier. But if you compare it back to the 2015 one, you can see the weight's gone down slightly, 2.04 to 2.0. The width is slightly less, depth is slightly less, and the height is slightly less. So, as I said, it's all quite good. So, the ports are the same as the 2016 and later models, so you've still got 4 Thunderbolt 3 USB-C ports, and they have not relented on that at all. They have not given back any USB-A, SD card, HDMI, so you're still all new ports only. I'll come back to the keyboard in a minute. Yep.
Could you separate it around the center?
What's it called? Switcher cast. Yep. Should be running. Yep. So so the trackpad is the same, physically larger one compared to the old. It's similar to the 2016 models. The number of pixels per inch on the display has actually gone up slightly. They've squeezed a little bit more in there. Effectively what they've done is they've made the resolution of the screen the same as the 13-inch models now. So if you notice, the numbers are mostly 227s. The 15-inch model was previously an exception. It was slightly bigger pixels, but now they're all roughly the same size, so that's probably an improvement. The native resolution of the screen is 3072 by 1920, which is up from 2880 by 1800. So effectively you've got roughly 100 more pixels vertically and about 200 more horizontally. So not a lot, but it's nice to have a bit more. Interestingly, what they've done, now this is actually out of date because I discovered after I wrote this that Apple had changed their website. If I go back to this page and look at technical specs, they corrected this after I updated my spreadsheet. The display resolutions they initially claimed were the same as the 15-inch model, but then they updated it so they're bigger. Where's it gone? Graphics, memory, storage, processor. There. So the scaled resolutions are actually not the same as the previous one, so I'm not quite sure what happens if you plug in an external display that's running at one of the old standard resolutions like 1920 by something or 1280 by something, because these are actually slightly bigger. It'll probably scale down a bit further. They just don't offer those as a standard built-in feature. So the effect you get is everything's a small percentage more space on the screen to put stuff at each of the standard scaled resolutions. My one complaint about this new model is they have not introduced Wi-Fi version 6 or 82.11ax, which they have done on the new iPhone models. So that was the one reason I wanted to wait one more model, because I wanted my next computer, which will last me 6 years, to work with the newest Wi-Fi networks, which are likely to become common over that time frame. So that's the only thing that was holding me back. The price was more important than the than the Wi-Fi hardware, so I decided to go ahead with that. They've also increased the power supply. It's now a 96 watt rather than an 87 watt one. It's the same physical size, just produces more power. And the battery has higher capacity. It's 100 watt hours or 99.8 or something like that, which is the maximum battery you're allowed to carry on an aircraft in the US. So they can't make the battery any bigger. So, keyboard is the single biggest change in my opinion. For those who are at all familiar with the 2016 to 2019 models, Apple switched from their original design of keys, which use a scissor switch mechanism, to something called a butterfly switch mechanism. And in the process, they made the key travel awfully short, so it's like you're hitting on something very hard and your hands bounce off straight away, rather than it being a lot longer and softer travel. And they changed the shape of the keys. They made the keycaps bigger, so they're all close. All the keys were closer together, and they're a lot more stable. That was the main advantage that they were. So on the older keyboards, they feel quite wobbly. If you move your finger around, you can feel the key wobbling. The butterfly keys are very stable. They don't wobble. So that was the one advantage. Unfortunately, some people encountered a problem where the butterfly keys could misbehave. And the two common forms of misbehaviour were either the key didn't actually type the key you thought when you told it to, so you hit the key and nothing happened, or you hit the key and it entered the same key twice. And there have been a couple of people publishing articles about this. One of them was very funny because they wrote the entire article with their keyboard, which had all the E's missing in it. And they included a switch which you could toggle it to the correct version or what they actually typed, what came out after they typed it. Shortly after that article came out is when Apple released the previous updates to the MacBooks with the revised third generation butterfly keyboards, which they claimed were fixing the reliability problems. Now, Apple has also had a keyboard repair program, which they've been running for the last about 2 or 3 years, where all of those models of butterfly keyboards are eligible to have their keyboards replaced by Apple for up to 4 years after you buy the computer if something goes wrong with it of that nature. So, having said all that, the new 16-inch MacBook Pro is the first one that no longer has a butterfly keyboard. Apple have gone back to the scissor switch mechanism. In fact, what they've done is they've taken the Magic Keyboard, of which this is an example, and effectively slightly modified the mechanism on this one because the key travel is slightly higher on this than it is on the new MacBook Pro. But the end result is that this keyboard, which nobody is complaining about, is almost identical to the built-in keyboard on the new MacBook Pro, or at least the miniature version of this is the full-size version. I didn't bring my small version of it. It refers to under the keycap, there's a kind of a scissor-shaped thing like that, so when you push down it goes like that. The butterfly switch has a more complicated mechanism which involves a little metal dome that it's pushing down on. I haven't actually worked out what exactly the distinction is, but they are a completely different switch mechanism. The scissor switch is the one that's been used for decades on a variety of different keyboards, and it's regarded as the standard keyboard that never went wrong, and Apple thought they could do better, and it turned out that maybe they couldn't by changing the whole concept. Now, do they have a detailed picture of the keyboard? I have to wait for the picture to load because it's taking its time. That's just general. They probably aren't emphasising it, but there will be other websites. There we are. There's one. Okay, that gives you an idea of what we're talking about. So this is what it looks like from the top. So for those who have seen a 2016 or 19, it looks very similar, at least how the keys appear, the individual keycaps. So what Apple's actually done is they've taken the Magic Keyboard keycaps and they've done some slight tweaks to it, so they've shortened the key travel. The key travel is actually double of that of the most recent revision of the butterfly keyboard. So the butterfly keyboard the last revision has got 0.5 millimetre of travel. This one's 1 millimetre of travel. So it's enough of a difference that it actually apparently feels much better to type on. I've been listening to all the podcasts and people have used these things and they're all very happy with it by comparison. They also slightly widened the gap between the keys, which means that that eliminates the problem where people were finding where they couldn't actually work out where the key boundaries were. If you're a touch typist, you aim for the keys, you feel them, and you don't need to look at the keyboard, but it was hard to feel the edges because they were so close together. So they've improved that by making them wider, or making the keycap slightly smaller and the gap slightly bigger. The other thing they've done is, if you've seen those later models, you'll know that they changed the design of the arrow keys in the bottom right-hand corner, where the left and right arrow keys were the full height of the option and control keys. So you had a full height left arrow, then 2 half height up and down arrows, and a full height right arrow. People who are used to the old keyboard didn't like that because they could no longer feel where the arrow keys were. There was a nice gap above them before which gave you an immediate, easy way of locating them. They've gone back to the old design again, so it now has an inverted T shape, which I'm very happy about because I like that inverted T shape. I'm used to it. Another complaint that people had was in the top left-hand corner of the previous generation, there was no physical escape key. The touch bar ran all the way to the left side of the keyboard, and if you needed to push escape, you had to aim at this unfeelable thing which had the word escape, a picture of an escape key printed on it, so you had to know where it was and get the positioning right. It was difficult to hit the escape key, and a significant proportion of people who use this computer are software developers who use the escape key heavily and were complaining till they were blue in the face about the fact that there was no escape key they could type. Apple worked around this by giving you the option of turning the caps lock key into an escape key. There's a configuration setting for it in system preferences. But now there's a real one there, then you don't actually need to use that setting anymore, which makes it easier. So because of the physical escape key, that means the touch bar has shrunk slightly. It's now only occupying the number key positions up to halfway through the delete key. And you can see there is a visible gap between the escape key and the touch bar, and also a visible gap between the touch bar and the Touch ID sensor on the top right hand corner. They've also increased the gap between the top row of keys and the touch bar because all the gaps have got bigger, which means it's less likely you'll accidentally touch the touch bar when you actually want to the top row of keys, which is another complaint that people have with the previous design. So that should help a bit as well. So overall, the keyboard sounds like it's close enough to what I'm used to on my 2013, 14, 15 model that it's going to be fine to work with. Whereas the butterfly keys, whenever I've touched one of those computers, I have cringed and hated it from the moment my hands have touched the keyboard. It feels horrible. I cannot get used to the larger keycaps. Luckily I managed to dodge that whole generation. I just, as a touch typer since the age of 13, I really do not want to have to deal with looking at the keys to work out where things were, which I don't have to do. So that's good.
Hey Rex.
Well, Rex, you've had one of these computers since 2017, I think, haven't you? So you may have got the second generation, which was a slight improvement over the first one, but you were finding you were having keys misbehaving on you, weren't you? So yeah.
I find if you're typing a paragraph, say, and you stop somewhere and look around and do something, and you start typing a bit more, and then you find that the bit that you've typed isn't on the end of that, it's somewhere else.
Right.
Yes, that happens.
Now that's probably not the keyboard, that's actually the trackpad,
That's probably my fault,
because the trackpad got bigger and it's more susceptible to accidentally moving things around. But if the insertion point had actually moved, that suggests you actually had to have clicked somewhere, because simply using the trackpad without clicking wouldn't have caused it to actually move the insertion point, just scroll at the worst, or move the mouse cursor. So that might be explained if you have the tap to click feature turned on for the trackpad. So there's a setting for tap to click. So with tap to click turned on, you just need to touch the trackpad with your finger and let go, and that will count as a tap, which will click on a certain point in the document and move the insertion point there, for example. If you turn that off, you've actually got to push down on the trackpad much more actively in order to make it treated as a click. I've got used to it being on, so I like that feature because it means I do less effort to make my make clicks happen. But you may find that that sort of problem goes away if you turn off that feature, if you have it turned on. But you can see there the size of the trackpad. That's actually a picture of this model? Not quite. No, this is actually an example of a different model with a larger trackpad. If you compare that picture to the one below it, they're a similar size by the looks of it. Let's scroll that down slightly. There we go. So yeah, it's rough. This one's bigger. That might be a 13-inch model which has a slightly smaller trackpad. So it's hard to tell. They're standardised videos. No, the key problem that people are running into, pardon the pun, is that, as I said, the bouncing keys or the missing keys was the issue that only some people had, but it happened often enough that everybody who seemed to be a sort of professional Macintosh commentator had run into it. So it's high enough proportion that it's significant, and it's enough to make me not want to buy one of those myself. So, yeah. Okay, so the only other points I wanted to mention about this, I think, were the sound. Basically, the one review I read about the sound system was jaw-droppingly good. Shane, yep. Right, okay, so I'm nearly finished on this now, so it'll be a couple of minutes. So the audio output of these is apparently stunningly better than every other Mac laptop ever. They've done something pretty amazing to the quality of the speakers, such that you can actually, he compared it to a reasonably good portable set of speakers in terms of sound quality, sort of like a light version of Apple's HomePod, which probably nobody here has heard, so that's not a very useful comparison. The microphones are also improved, though they're not necessarily good enough yet to not have a dedicated microphone for professional or high-end use, but they're a lot better than they were previously. So the only other point I was going to say is, what does this mean now for all the other laptops? this is the 15-inch or now the 16-inch model, which Apple's released, just in time for Christmas. So it's sort of like a pro season because they're coming up with a Mac Pro next month as well, which is the high-end desktop tower machine. The likelihood is Apple basically, of course, haven't promised anything, and they even implied that they may be continuing with the butterfly keyboard on some models. But I think what's going to happen is the 13-inch MacBook Pro will also switch to this keyboard, probably in the next update, and that's likely to be sometime next year, hopefully by about the middle of the year, if not earlier. So it might be March, might be June, somewhere around there. That would mean that anybody who is thinking about buying a 13-inch MacBook Pro but isn't in a hurry might want to wait until the next model just so they get the better keyboard. The picture for the MacBook Air is less clear. The current model came out in August, I think. That may not get updated again for longer. That depends mainly on whether Apple's got anything to update it to, a newer processor or something like that. They may wait a while and eventually update it when they get round to it. They may continue with the butterfly keyboard on that one because it's a different keyboard design which has function keys on it, and all these new keyboards will have touch bars. So I don't know yet exactly where the line is going to be drawn, so we'll have to wait until the next models come out to find that out. But I don't expect to see, certainly don't expect to see any new product releases between now and Christmas. Unlikely for January, possible in February, more likely in March, much more likely by April. That's sort of the pattern, I'm thinking. So.
David, I take it it's got Mojave in it at the moment.
Nope. If you buy one of these 16-inch MacBook Pros, they come with Catalina, and there is no possibility of running anything older on them because they cannot boot on older operating systems because the older operating systems do not have the drivers for the new graphics cards.
Okay, so although you bought it now to get the discount, as it were.
Yep. That machine is going to run Catalina. I have no choice about it. So.
Put any of your stuff on it until you're...
No, what I'll probably do is clone everything onto it and then have a play with it. So I'll use that as my test machine while I'm getting used to it. So once I'm happy with it, I'll retire this one or do whatever I'm going to do with it. So, yeah. I'll just maintain them in parallel until I'm happy with it, basically.
Progress with hidden problems with MacBook Pro that are to do with cramming so much into a small space, like things like stuff going wrong under the keyboard or the screen.
There's a perpetual problem with the battery failing potentially, which can cause it to expand. That's got nothing to do with a particular model. That can happen to any of them. There is the issues with the graphics controllers overheating. That was mostly a problem of... Yeah, most of the models affected by that had NVIDIA graphics controllers, and there was an AMD generation as well. The last ones that I know of that had that problem were the 2012 models. There haven't been any since then that I'm aware of as being a widespread problem. So that problem has basically gone away because Apple had a bad batch in 2011. The 2011 15-inch MacBook Pros were particularly bad, and the 2010s and 2012 ones with NVIDIA graphics controllers were particularly bad. But this has an NVIDIA graphics controller in the 2013 generation, and it's been fine. This is now a 6-year-old computer, and it's working fine. And since this generation, Apple stopped using NVIDIA. They went to AMD for all the graphics controllers that have, in all the Macs that have dedicated graphics controllers. So they've, basically NVIDIA screwed them over the blame game on who was responsible for the problems with the graphics controllers, and Apple decided we're not going to deal with NVIDIA anymore, in effect. So they just switched to AMD for everything. And we're now getting to the point where the graphics capabilities of this new MacBook Pro are roughly equivalent to a high-end iMac, 27-inch iMac. Not quite as good as an iMac Pro, but they're ballpark maybe a little bit older iMac, but not by much. So it's really a portable workstation on this 15-inch model. It's quite powerful. So I'm looking forward to having a nice, powerful computer that will last me another 7 years, I hope. 6 or 7 years. So yeah.